So I'm sitting in the lobby of Apple waiting there, and security like clears me to go in, and I'm wearing a suit. A second later, Steve Jobs walks in the elevator, and I'm thinking to myself, oh shit. And he's just like on me. What are you doing here? Where'd you go to school? What'd you study?
Sargam Patel is a successful engineer turned entrepreneur.
His protector case company, Agent 18, was among the first in Apple's accessories ecosystem, giving him a large first-mover advantage in the early days of mobile computing, and allowed him to create the top-selling cases for the entire iPod and iPhone product lines.
Since selling his business, he has begun working on artificial intelligence services through his new venture, Stealth AI.
One of the things that I learned pretty early on is that successful person or that person that you want to talk to has no idea that you exist. You have to make that opportunity for yourself. But I was able to get 120% loan to value on my condo, which freed up about $15,000. Like I remember I'd gotten an American Express card, like one of the business cards. And I remember them calling me several times, like, hey, just so you know, you're like at $100,000 right now. And we had every obstacle kind of come at us. I really feel like that company was a death by 1,000 cuts. The highest probability of success is not how good the entrepreneur is, it's market timing.
Interesting.
It's the only thing that really matters.
Hey guys, I'm James Danley. Welcome back to the Bulldogs Podcast. Today we're continuing our immigrant entrepreneur series. I have a very good friend of mine and a past client that's with us today. He immigrated from India as a kid with his family. At 25, he was the first producer and maker of the iPod case. He ended up building a company that was one of the largest and leaders in mobile accessories, selling in over 80 countries globally. He's lived a very interesting, cool entrepreneurial life from the time he was young. I would like to welcome Sargam Patel. Sargam, thanks for coming in today, man.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you,
Thanks
bro.
for having me.
No, it's been too long. It's cool. I'm excited we finally got to do this. When we started doing it, you were one of the guys that was on my mind. I was like, I want to get Sargam in to tell a story about building that business. And
Thank you.
In California from the time you were young and being like a 25-year-old entrepreneur. And
Yeah.
the whole life story is just awesome. So why don't you just tell the audience, I guess we could start with kind of like where you were from, like where you were born in India, like how old were you when you immigrated to the U.S.?
Yeah, no problem.
And
Sure.
what did that kind of look like?
Yeah, so we immigrated here when I was about 18 months old, really young.
Okay.
My dad was actually recruited to do aerospace work. He was a pretty good metals engineer. And so he came over to the U.S. Him and my mom became citizens pretty quick. And I had a green card until I was 18. So he did aerospace work all of his life pretty much.
Now, what state did you guys move to originally?
We were here in Michigan.
Oh, you were in Michigan. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember we met when you were moving back from California.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I grew up in Michigan. And then while I was at Michigan State, I started doing internships in LA for a big audio company called Harmon, which is now owned by Samsung. And so I did 2 internships there. One of them was like a 8-month internship. And so they offered me a position when I graduated. I studied electrical engineering and physics at Michigan State. And I moved out there, when I was 21 years old.
That's a good time to move to California.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. A really eye-opening experience.
So what was it like, man, like growing up in Michigan as an immigrant kid with the family? What are your memories of it? Like your examples, your dad, obviously he had good work ethic if he's a successful engineer.
He did for a while. And, it was tough. It was tough when we first moved here. So we moved here in 79, 80. And we were, in Troy, kind of like near DeQuinder and 18 Mile or so. And just growing up in the area was really challenging, especially the younger days when there wasn't a lot of Indian people walking around and there wasn't a lot of diversity in the area.
Sure.
Dealing with kind of the standard response to people seeing somebody unlike them.
Makes sense. What are your memories of that as a kid? How did that kind of shape and influence you too?
I think it was interesting. It definitely showed me a level of courage that my parents and I think a lot of immigrants have that I didn't recognize. Looking back now, I recognize it. Like, they basically moved from a different world, you know, and at this time there wasn't the internet and the ability to communicate globally like we do now. You know, today at the tip of our fingers, you can watch a show made in any part of the world, or learn a language, experience different foods and cultures. Even here in Michigan now, like the Detroit area is thriving with all these wonderful restaurants that are, you know, from different parts of the world. It just wasn't the case then, you know. And so for them to make a move and experience everything from like winters, which they didn't have in Bombay, to different foods and cultures, and you know, it was a challenge. But they saw a greater potential here than anywhere else, and so you know, the challenge was worth it.
It takes a lot of guts, man, to move your family across the world, especially like you said, before the technology era.
Yeah.
Did your parents speak pretty good English before they immigrated, or was it like okay?
You know, it's interesting because I guess good is relative.
Yeah.
Like, they spoke very proper English because it was English that they learned in school, starting through like grade school into college. And they're both, you know, professionals, and so college was always taught in English, I think, in India, because they realized the importance of it. But it was also a very kind of proper English. So I think
more British proper English, probably.
Yeah, or just yeah, they would you know, use the proper word for everything. So the slang that existed here, I think, was foreign to them. And then obviously there was an accent component that they were trying to deal with.
Were your parents pretty strict on you then growing up with regards to school and education and discipline and all that stuff? Or what'd that look like in your family?
Yeah, so actually I was very different than a lot of other Indian kids here, I think. My parents weren't as strict when it came to academics and a lot of other things. My dad was always kind of entrepreneurial, and my mom has been an entrepreneur all of her life.
Oh, really? I didn't know your mom was an entrepreneur. That's awesome.
Yeah. In a much smaller sense. You know, she was a real estate agent for a long time, for about 20 years, and has always had like a little catering company. And, you know, she's always kind of picked up these little entrepreneurial gigs that would let her work as hard as she wanted. You know, I think a traditional 9 to 5 for her kind of had her bump into a ceiling of not being able to do more when she wanted to.
So your parents were a little more fluid and creative than some of the other, like, more strict Indian families. Do you think that affected your career journey, that gave you a different background to be successful as an entrepreneur? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think having the ability to see different perspectives, you know, because I would say 10 years after we got here, there was an influx of people coming over from India when, I don't know if it was nationally or statewide, they were seeking a lot of professionals. And so we had a lot of people that were like members of our community that were 2 doctors, or a doctor and a lawyer, a doctor engineer, and their kids had like a heavy focus on academics. And I think it was simply because their parents saw this as a path to success.
Sure.
And a defined path, one that you could easily measure and follow. And I think my parents never necessarily had that or looked at it that way.
That's awesome. It worked out to your benefit, I think, though, probably.
So, maybe, hopefully.
So it's cool. And so you're a Michigan, essentially born and raised kid, went to Michigan State. What did you study at the university?
Electrical engineering and physics.
Oh, you did? So you were going the engineering path that your dad went down. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a hard road.
Was it a good fit for your skill sets? Did you like it? Like, was it forced?
No, I loved it. I think I've been an engineer all my life, like bigger, you know, building stuff, tinkering with stuff, trying to understand how things worked. And even before I went into college, I had a huge passion for audio. Was never a good musician, but always like kind of an audiophile. And so I was tinkering with that stuff. And, you know, so my first year at Michigan State, I sent out 4 or 5 emails to different people at audio companies saying, hey, I want to be in the audio world. Like, you know, I'm in engineering school now. Like, what degree do I get?
And this is a freshman year?
Yeah.
Good for you.
And so 3 people wrote me back, and 2 said electrical engineering and 1 said mechanical. So I did I did my degree in electrical and my minor in mechanical and physics.
That's awesome.
And so the following year, my sophomore year, between Christmas break, I think between like the semesters, I went to LA and just went out there and couch crashed with a friend and started applying for jobs.
That's amazing.
And worked at a recording studio for a little while, and that was a lot of fun. It was like messing with all the equipment that I had designed in engineering school and kind of figured out how it worked. And then applied for an internship at Harmon and got it, and it changed my life.
That's awesome. So when you moved to California to work at Harmon, was that just for an internship position, or that was full-time after graduation?
No, an internship, yeah. So the first one was a summer internship, so I think I started like in May and wrapped up in August. And, it's one of the things that I don't know if they exist as much as they do, or they did then, but, internships are such a fantastic opportunity for both the employer and for the person entering that space, because you really get a feel for, one, culturally what it's like to be there, and two, if you want to, devote your time and energy to that profession. And it's a relatively small cost for the employer to really know if someone's passionate about that job. And so every day that I was there, I loved it, and I knew I wanted to be there, and it made all of us that were there kind of fight that much harder to be successful. And I think the company saw the benefits of that a few years later when we all came on and started designing great products. And
so you had a group of interns, you guys all worked together?
Yeah, it was actually me and one other guy the first year.
Okay.
And then I think it was 3 or 4 of us the next year. And it's funny because all those guys are still in audio, and now they run companies, and I was the only one that kind of left the audio world.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's wild, man. So you guys all ended up working at Harmon together when you graduated?
3 of us did.
Three
and one
of
of
the
them
4.
took a job at another audio company.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what were your lessons learned, man, when you first started that first internship? As you look back, like what did that teach you? How was that beneficial to your growth and your career?
So, I would say even before that, I did a few internships in high school, and it was here actually in Birmingham. I worked for an appraisal company, and the guy I worked for was just the most incredible guy. And he mentored me at the most basic level that I think I realized that was a huge competitive advantage that I never understood at the time.
Does he actually mentor you and spend time with you? What kind of business was that?
It was an appraisal company.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so I remember, and I was like, the copy boy, basically. I used to, literally make copies of appraisals and, staple them together and forward them to banks and, other relevant entities.
But he cared enough to actually mentor you a bit in the process.
I think the things he taught me, one, it was my first hands-on experience with an entrepreneur, and seeing how, he lived this very kind of straightforward lifestyle in the sense of if he didn't work, he didn't get paid. And how much he got paid was a direct reflection of how much he worked. And so it was cool to see that he had ebbs and flows. It's like he's going on vacation for 2 weeks and he'd work his butt off for the month before and the month after. So it was that high level stuff, but then also the simple, taking pride in what you do, making sure that stack of papers is straight before you staple it together. Looking someone in the eye when you hand them a document. It's those basic things of life that I felt like we never really learned in school that I learned working for somebody, who had a standard that he wanted me to live up to, and it was like a start on the path to achieving greatness.
I think it's interesting that you had the observation to notice that at a young age and to pay attention to it, and that the memory still sticks to you today. I feel like a lot of young kids these days don't always pay attention. Even if they have a work opportunity, I don't know that they're thinking about the business owner and the attention to detail in the work. A lot of times they're not present. So that's interesting that you had that at a young age in your youth, and how it affected your vision then for your life, and that probably subliminally helped shape your path into entrepreneurship, I think. Yeah,
it's a great point. I've thought about that, and I remember in my early career thinking, oh, it was so easy 100 years ago when nothing had been invented to invent things. And what I realized quickly is that there's always going to be innovation and there's always going to be opportunities. And I think what we really need to do for this generation coming up is help them identify opportunities. And I also think that, there's a tide that exists in society, and it's very difficult to swim against that tide. But sometimes you have to. And sometimes it's kind of that internal thing that starts as a whisper that you really kind of need to nourish to understand. I think you and I have been there because we've been entrepreneurs, and it is, right? Real estate market's tough.
Everything's
and business
changing,
is
yeah.
tough.
You always have to adapt and be in the forefront of things.
Right, exactly. And so I think that, and that's a difficult path, and I think that's always been a difficult path, but I think it's important to focus on it.
So for someone that's younger, how do they take a conscious effort to train themselves to see opportunity?
So I guess using an example from my life, one of the things that I learned pretty early on is that successful person or that person that you want to talk to has no idea that you exist. You have to make that opportunity for yourself, because you're never going to have the CEO of a company call you as a college student and be like, hey, let me offer you some advice. It's just not going to happen. And, they're busy living their life doing their thing. And so you kind of have to bring yourself to them and ask for their help. What I have found, though, is when you ask people for help, they tend to give it. But nobody kind of just unsolicited says, let me help this random person, walking down the street.
That's true.
And so I would say, kind of the old Gretzky saying, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, be shooting every day, all the time.
That's a great life philosophy. So let's get back into your career, man, because I want to talk about the business and how you've done what you've done. So, so you graduate from Michigan State. You've already done internships at Harmon. You take a full-time job with them. You move to California. So walk me through your career from there. How was it working at Harmon full-time versus the internship? What were you learning? How did you end up in the business and making mobile components?
Yeah, sure. So, I was at Harmon for 5 years, and I think it was my 4th year there that there was a big shakeup and everyone was kind of moving, divisions were merging. And I remember thinking wow, I don't have any control over this. What happens is going to happen. And so I also was a young kid, and, I had just bought a condo in LA and I'd remodeled it myself. And things were fairly stable. But I remember thinking maybe this is a good time for me to, see what opportunities are out there. And the president of the mobile accessories division at the time was a really, cool and eccentric guy. And I used to walk into my, office every day with my CD book under my arm, listening to music that day. And I remember he came into my little cubicle one day and was like, let me show you this thing. It's called an iPod. And I remember
this is at Harmon?
Yeah. And I remember thinking, this is incredible. It's the size of a pack of cigarettes or something, and it holds, at the time, 30 CDs or whatever. And so I went out and bought one, and I was like, this is an amazing device, but it's super fragile.
Yeah.
And, Apple at the time was doing all this, really, beautiful plastic stuff, and I remember thinking, this needs a case. And so having a background now in engineering and having been to China a bunch of times and understanding how that factory process worked, I built a prototype.
Wait, so you had been to China by then? Was that while you were working for Harmon? They had flown you back and forth to China?
Yeah, because I was doing a lot of China factory visits, to launch
awesome.
products. So as we would develop a product, as the engineer on that product, you're really taking that thing from zero to a full developed product. And so part of that process was making sure that it was built to a standard and that any issues that occurred at the factory, you were there to support kind of at that highest design level. So let's say, for example, they couldn't manufacture something and there's a design change needed. You're boots on the ground there ready to make a change. And you're working with those factory engineers to make sure that it's production ready.
Makes sense. So that experience then, along with your engineering background, you're like, I'm going to design a case
Yeah.
for the iPod.
Yeah. And so I had met the buyer at Apple when Apple had just started opening retail stores, and I had met him at one of the LA retail stores when they were opening it. I think it was like the Grove or something like that at the time. And so, and there was also nobody in the mobile accessory space really. There was a couple players that were doing like the old like kind of leather belt holder cases that had kind of been like an extension of the BlackBerry. But nobody was really capturing the design intent that I think Apple and Steve Jobs were really driving at the time. So anyway, I called up this buyer at Apple and said, hey, I've got this idea, and I don't know if it's any good or not, but like, I know you're a baseball fan. How about we go to a game and like, I'll just show it to you between innings. And so
that's smart.
We're sitting there talking. I've got $4,000 of prototypes in my pocket, which is, pretty much my life savings at the time. And so I'm showing him these cases, and he's like, this is pretty good. Like, you should come back in 2 weeks and like be ready. Have your company, have your product. Let's do this. And it was a really exciting time at Apple because they were very entrepreneurial still. It was like the biggest entrepreneurial company in the world. To even entertain like a one-man show like me to be like, yeah, we're going to consider looking at your product. It was an awesome experience, and I feel really grateful that experience existed. So I go back home and I'm spending the next 2 weeks trying to figure everything out. A brand name, product, what am I going to launch, who's going to make it, how much is it going to cost, what's the tooling going to be. And so I basically got everything ready to go and went back up to Apple and pitched them the product. And it was such a amazing conversation because it was like, guys, I don't have any money. Like, I've got this idea and I've got the wherewithal and know how to do it, but that's kind of where it ends. And it was, I'm sure there was angel investors and all that stuff at the time, and I just didn't know what I didn't know.
Sure.
I was 25 at the time.
How did you make the actual prototype? Did you like make it by hand, or you use the guy at Contacts in China to help you make it?
No, there's like prototype houses all over LA that were using at the time basically multi-million-dollar 3D printers. So they used a different technology at the time, but now, like most things, that $3 or $4 million machine you can buy for $150 on Amazon.
It's wild.
So that's why it was $4,000 in prototypes at the time. But yeah, so I had it made at one of the local like prototype shops in LA. Again, like great guys that were like, "Good luck with this, man. I hope it works out for you." And so we pitched it, and Apple wrote me a purchase order that day for 5,000 pieces.
No way.
And
who was it that you pitched it to at Apple?
It was one of the buyers there.
Nice.
And so fast forward, I've now got the thing tooled.
Hold on, so you get a purchase order for 5,000 units. How do you then go get the money to make them?
Right. So then I get the purchase order, and then I tell the buyer at Apple, I don't have the money to pay for this. And so I'm like, can you guys just advance me some money? And they're like, no, dude, we don't know anything about you. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I went back, and this was, again, where real estate kind of comes in. This was like 2004. So the heyday of like real estate's untouchable. You can borrow against it. I don't remember what interest rates were at the time. But I was able to get 120% loan to value on my condo, which freed up about $15,000.
Oh, that's epic.
And I borrowed against my car and maxed out every credit card. So I came up with like around 20 grand. Flew to China and was like, I need 2 tools and 5,000 pieces. And here's what I've got to work with. And they were like, let's do it. And so I feel like every step of the way in my entrepreneurial journey, like, it's just been by the grace of others that, you get there.
Well, you also took the gamble too, leveraged everything you had to borrow the necessary funds, and then flew to China. I mean,
but,
when you step out like in faith like that, providence moves too. I mean, that's the way it works.
It could be. I do feel, I'm not necessarily like very religious, but I think that the universe is protecting me somehow. Like I'm a very lucky person. And for years, my motto is, better to be lucky than good, because I feel like somehow I'm lucky. And so I get the 5,000 pieces made and ship them into Apple. And then things get crazy.
What did it cost you to make those?
Yeah, it was about $15,000 or something.
Okay.
And that was with some tooling, and they said, well, every order we're going to tack on some dollars for tooling.
And then were you concerned at all that they're just going to steal your products? Like there's no protections on it and then like go around you or like crush you in the marketplace?
Not at the time, because one, it was very relationship driven. The iPod was fairly new, so it wasn't like you were, I think where we are today, the path is much more sophisticated and simple now, because you can have a China factory and set up a Amazon store or I forgot what it's called. My daughter uses it all the time. Shein or whatever it is, like where you can buy directly from China.
Okay.
None of that existed then.
So they needed retail access through the U.S., so there was less risk of them cutting you out and going direct online.
Right. Absolutely.
That's amazing. So you get the first order, you leverage everything, you fulfill it, you ship it to Apple. So then what happens next? They like the units, like they approve the design concept and like. Yeah.
So I went back to pitch it.
So did you make money on the first 5,000 units? So you borrowed like $20,000,
yeah.
You spent 15 making them. What was the PA for? Do you even remember or no? Yes, in that purchase agreement, it would be.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
The purchase order or PO.
It was probably like $50,000 or something.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I go back to pitch it. I've got the final. So the way tooling works is there's like one step before production. And it's basically like the tool is ready, everything's done, but it's not like fully polished and dialed in. And so I had 10 samples or something off that tool ready to go. So I flew back up to Apple and met with them. So I'm sitting in the lobby of Apple waiting there, and security like clears me to go in, and I'm wearing a suit, which you never do at Apple. So I walk into the elevator, and a second later, Steve Jobs walks in the elevator. And I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, like, I don't know what to do. I'm kind of like head down, standing in the corner, and he's just like on me. What are you doing here? Where'd you go to school? What'd you study? And I think maybe he thought I was there in an interview. And so I like glance up and I notice that like, retail at the time was kind of his pet project. And so it wasn't far from him. It was on the same floor. It was like on one side and he was on the other side. So we're riding the elevator and I'm just like in defense mode. I'm showing my products to the retail team, and that's why I'm here to pitch it. And, and I'm just like bumbling, and even thinking about it now, like, making me nervous. So he's like, well, let me see it. Okay, so I start pulling these like iPods out of my pocket with cases on it, and he was, obviously like the engineer and design guy, and so he's kind of got the thing and he's looking at it really closely, and the elevator doors open and he just like walks out of the elevator
with your products.
And I was like, shit, like I have no idea what to do now. So I'm like kind of walking an awkward distance behind him, and I'm trying not to pee my pants. And so he like finally stops and turns and sets these cases down, and he's like, this is good work, and just leaves. And so I walk into the conference room I was supposed to meet with the Apple guys in, and I'm just like white as a ghost, and they're like, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. What do you think about this? And they're like, all right, this is great, let's go. And so I called China that night, and we polished the tools up and started shipping products. And I'd done everything myself at the time. Like, I designed the packaging, which was like fucking terrible. Like, if you saw that packaging today, you'd be like, what joke is this? Like, I think I didn't even pay for Photoshop. I designed it on like some free crappy thing.
Can we just not rush over the fact that you met Steve Jobs in person in an elevator in Apple?
The legendary elevator stories are true.
And he actually liked your product. I was like, it's good. Let's roll.
Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. And you were what, 25 at the time?
Yeah.
That's a great story, man.
Yeah. It's been good.
So then the packaging team was like, let's run with it. And then did you ever get to meet him again?
I was the packaging team.
You were the packaging team.
I was like the everything team, you know? I had a couple guys that I had partnered with at times. One of the most talented mechanical engineers I've ever met, and another guy that was like an expert at tooling and China operations. And
so how'd you scale? So then Apple says, yes, we like the product. So how does that look like from there? Did they give you like a large order then for mass quantity? Were they going to sell these in the Apple store?
Yeah.
Or like...
Yeah. So we started out with that 5,000 pieces. They went to a couple stores with it, and it was wildfire. And what I realized was the product was fantastic. And so that's really what it was. It wasn't about anything else. It wasn't about the god-awful packaging or, you know, everyone at the time at the Apple Store was doing like really beautiful boxes and like, you know, matte finishes, and the box cost more than my product did. And I had like this lousy clamshell packaging, which, you know, had a white insert card in it that said Agent 18 and something about the case. But it became this, I don't even know what the right word is, like this kind of, it was the go-to product. And so I remember, you know, fast forward getting closer to holiday, and, you know, things had gotten crazy. Like the POs kept growing and growing. I remember Apple wrote me a PO for like 500,000 pieces, you know, around December of that year.
Wow. That's the same year that you launched this thing.
Yeah, we launched in June, and December it was like 500,000 pieces. So I was like literally betting the farm. You know, I was borrowing where I could, when I could, you know, to make it work.
That's wild, man.
But the company, you know, it kind of exploded overnight. And I remember actually coming back here to Michigan, and actually this might have been the year after, because they had opened the Apple Store at Somerset. And I don't remember what year that was, but I remember like it was a sea of cases at the time. You know, everyone had kind of caught on and was in the space, and I walked up to someone that worked at Apple, and I was like, "Hey, I want a case for my iPod. What do you think?" And they grabbed my case, and I remember thinking like, "This is awesome."
That's wild.
You know.
So did you have to hire people like to help you scale this thing? I mean, right away, like
I mean, it was.
Did you go back to Harmon and hire some of your buddies from there? Like, who'd you hire, and how'd you end up building that business to supply them with the mass demand for these cases?
The great thing about the product was there was no assembly. And so once you made a tool, that tool could spit out 25 to 3,000 pieces a day, depending on, you know, tool conditions. And there was a lot of complex and technical things happening with plastics that would influence how many pieces you could get a day. But once you got it, you could throw it in a package and ship it. It wasn't like a more complicated product that required a lot of assembly or, you know, so we were producing pretty quick. And I was putting, like, I remember I'd gotten an American Express card, like one of the business cards. And I remember them calling me several times, like, "Hey, just so you know, you're like at $100,000 right now, or you're at $200,000 right now, or, you know, do you really want to make a, you know, $250,000 FedEx charge? Is this you?" Because we were just like doing whatever we could to get inventory over here.
That's wild.
And so then with the success at Apple, other retailers started carrying the iPod. And it was a really interesting thing because when you were at Apple, you kind of had this credibility with all these other retailers. And it was just such a, again, I felt like I was so lucky at the time because had I had any other product and went to Target or Walmart or Best Buy, they would have been like, "Get out of here," you know, or not even taking the meeting. But to be like, "Oh yeah, we're the top selling case at Apple right now.
Do you want to carry it?"
Yeah.
That's an easy sell.
It was an easy sell. And there was all these, you know, back and forth negotiations of things that are happening that really didn't amount to much because it was kind of like, this is all I can do, you know? And we've got this successful business running at Apple, and we'd love to be here at Target or Walmart or Best Buy, but like, here's what I'm capable of. And looking back, the stupidity of that, for me to say that kind of thing, it still, like, I still feel weird about it when I think about it, knowing what I know now. But I think part of that ignorance and that, like, youth of being like, sorry, Best Buy, here's what I can do. It just sounds so stupid to say that out loud
Instead
now.
of finding a way to sell them way more.
Seriously, yeah. It was like...
what was it they were asking for, and what was it you were able to provide?
We're just like, oh, we want better pricing, or we want this or that. And I was like, well, this is kind of the price. You know, this is what Apple pays. And they're kind of like, I got to protect my relationship with Apple. You know, like, they are like the lifeblood of what is happening here. So I can't give you better pricing than Apple. And they were like, all right, fine. And they'd write a PO, you know? And it was, again, I don't know if it was the timing or just I was asking a lot of stupid questions, but, like, I remember, you know, for example, in negotiating with one of the big box retailers, I don't remember if it was Target or Best Buy or Walmart or what, but it was like, oh yeah, we have these payment terms where we're going to pay you in 90 days, but if you want us to pay you sooner than that, we have to discount how much we give you. You know, so it was like, you're going to get paid in 90, or if you want to get paid in 30, it's a 3% discount. I was like milking those discounts as much as possible. I'm like, well, how much is it if you pay me in 10 days? And they're like, we've never had somebody ask that.
Because you were tight on cash and you needed to grow the business.
And I was like, well, can you let me know? You know, and so I remember, like, asking these questions, and people were like, nobody's ever asked this. And I think they even felt like, this is ridiculous. Like, we're Best Buy. We don't change our policies. And they did.
They did because they wanted the product.
And that was the wonderful thing about just doing business here. You know, kind of getting back to the whole immigrant story of, like, I asked all these questions, and everyone could have said no at any time. But, like, people were willing to help. You know, these big companies that you think of, like, are just machines were willing to help. I mean, it was incredible, you know? It's given me a really, like, optimistic view of the world, because I would get calls from somebody that would be like, I've never heard of this person, and they're a VP of something at, you know, and I didn't even realize what that meant at the time, that, like, oh, a VP from Target is calling me. But they're like, yeah, we don't usually do this, but we'll do a 5% discount and pay you in 10 days. And I was like, all right, cool. You know, that was cheaper than I could borrow money anywhere else.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so,
do you remember what your margin was on the units? Like, what were you paying to have them made, and how much you were selling them for?
The margins were fantastic in the beginning. I mean, like, 100%.
That's awesome.
You know,
and that's after all your shipping costs, everything. You're marking up 100% to Apple or Walmart or Target or whoever.
Yeah.
So it was profitable.
Yeah. And then that changed pretty quickly. I think the retailers realized, you know, where things were. And, you know, the retailers also were starting to get much more sophisticated in China as well. You know, Walmart, I think, led the way.
So is this like a year or two run? Or, I mean, how long did it take you to get into all the major, like, go from Apple to into all the major retailers?
Yeah, it's probably about 18 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
So year and a half, and you were the one that was spearheading the sales on that and those relationships to get into all the retailers.
Yeah.
So a year and a half, and you're into everyone.
You'd have to check, but I think the iPhone came out in 2006.
Okay.
And we crushed it. We launched the case that everybody loved.
For the actual iPhone, too.
Yeah.
So you went from making just cases for the iPod
to
cases
every product
for the
they
iPhone.
launched, we would, you know, have this chasing process of making a case and getting it out there. And but yeah, we invented the, like, slider case for the iPod, or for the iPhone, which was like two pieces that slid, you know, onto the phone to protect it. And it just was incredible. And again, I give all the credit to that mechanical engineer who just knocked it out of the park with that design. It was the first time I had experienced, like, true, like, kind of business stuff where, like, a big competitor of ours knocked that case off.
Oh, they duplicated it, stole it from you guys. Even though, did you have IP on it?
No, we didn't. And they made it better, you know. they were a much more fashion-forward company, which kind of aligned with Apple's brand, and so they took a big chunk of our market share at the time.
Wow. That was a few years in the business?
Yeah.
How many employees did you like start with and then like grow to over
So we
a
started
couple
with
years?
like one, me, and I was doing a lot of things. I was working all the time. But again, it was like, just part of youth and
Yeah, you're 25, full court press.
adrenaline, and so I remember having different colored notepads for different things, and taking them to people. And when I would go to like a retail meeting, I would ask for like 15 minutes at the end of the meeting to be like, can you tell me what presentation minimum means, and like write it down, because I'm learning these retail rules. And then I'd be having that same conversation with a China factory. It's like, tell me why the pressure of the tool affects the quality of how clear the part is, and having an engineering background, I felt like that part was actually more comfortable than some of the retail stuff, and like understanding how operations and air freight versus sea freight and all these different aspects of the business. But it was great. I mean, I learned so much.
And then what about like the management of it, like the employees, salary, overhead? I mean, because that whole financial management end is usually difficult. I guess when you're in a business where there's so much demand for the product, your problem is just to be able to sell enough. Is maybe a different focus than a standard small business that's trying to grow.
Yeah, we didn't care about any of that.
So you just hired people, paid them what you needed to through. I mean, who oversaw like the financial end of the business?
I had an accounting firm that I worked with that also like gave us some bookkeeping services. So again, I learned a lot about that. I was like, teach me what bookkeeping is. And I had a finance notebook, and it was again remarkable to have all these people that were willing to teach you something, but you had to ask the question, because I think they would have never stopped and said, hey, do you want me to teach you this? If I hadn't said, I have no idea what you just did or how you did it, like, can you show me? So many people were willing to be like, yep. I remember
awesome.
like sitting with the partner of an accounting firm who probably billed $500-600 an hour, whiteboarding how inventory and production and things like that worked from a financial standpoint. And it was like, thank you so much for teaching me this stuff. He's like, oh yeah, no problem, happy to help. And I felt like that was kind of the mantra of this business, is people were like, oh, happy to help. It was incredible.
That's amazing, man. It's so funny because like people go to college and they burn 4 years to like learn this stuff in theory in a classroom with a professor who doesn't actually do it. And then meanwhile, you're just doing it and then learning it in the process and just asking legitimate, sincere questions. And instead of being fearful about asking questions or like what people are going to think of you, you just asked all the questions. I mean, that's an amazing approach to life. A lot of kids are insecure and they're too afraid to ask questions and to actually learn. But when you ask the questions, people usually answer them and help. That's an amazing testimony.
Yeah, I think, thank you, first of all. But like, I think it's, for some reason, I think we correlate knowledge and vulnerability, and saying you don't know something is being vulnerable. But I think that what I would like to see more people do is say, I feel like I'm a smart person, but I don't know how this works, or I have no experience in this, but I'd love to learn from you that does have experience. You and I had this conversation when we were talking about Michigan real estate, right? It was like, I kind of knew how it worked in LA. We had, with the success of the company, I had sold that condo that I kind of leveraged early on, built a house. So I learned a lot about architecture and steel and glass, and it was a great experience, and kind of understood how LA real estate worked. But then coming here, it was like, I don't understand any of this. I don't understand how people make offers or not, or but again, it was like running into you and you teaching us all that stuff, and also guiding us on like, oh yeah, here's the right property to get for you guys as a young family. Like, you probably don't want to live in downtown Birmingham where the kids can't ride their bikes yet, and just having those types of conversations with people, I feel like can really make a big impact in your life. But you have to just be like, I don't know,
and ask the questions.
Yeah.
Dude, that's an amazing like journey, bro. So you started that company like roughly like 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
And
2004.
then you guys sold it in 2017. So that's a long run. So what did that look like? So obviously after you said 05 or 06, they launched like the iPhone, so you're making cases for both of those.
Yeah.
What did the company look like at its peak? Like what types of products were you guys making? Was it just those two on mass scale, or did you guys expand and have a decent array of products? Like how many employees did you have? Like,
yeah, you know what's funny is, again, going back to the kind of business school approach is as the company started to gain some traction, I had a lot of like business school friends tell me what to do, and it wasn't always the right thing, which was a shock to me.
Did you take their counsel and advice and like make mistakes?
At times. Oh yeah, at times.
Or did you get wise
it was
to
like, oh, that was a $2 million mistake, you know?
Give me a couple examples of that.
All right, so, you know, we were a case manufacturer. We had no moving parts, off-tool parts. You know, we would package them relatively simply and ship them over. We didn't have concerns about a million things that can happen when you enter different products. But I remember talking to somebody that was like, well, you got to be in batteries. You got to be in cables, because this mobile accessories orbit is kind of becoming this thing. And a lot of the people that were really good at that stuff, you know, the Belkins of the world, realized the margin in cases and the simplicity of that business. So they started to move into that business. And so it was kind of a natural expectation that I tried to move into their businesses and compete. It was never a good idea.
That's a terrible idea, yeah.
I didn't have the expertise, and I guess I could have hired the expertise and built that out. But then you're competing with a very sophisticated player that has millions of dollars of infrastructure behind it and very deep relationships.
Versus having first mover advantage, which you were in the space you were in, and being the best at making that product and just controlling that market segment and trying to hoard as much of the market as you can keep.
Yeah.
Via relationships and design or whatever else to be competitive against them.
Right. But I also think that, like most businesses, there's a timing to it. And timing is everything. And I think looking back, like, we were in the space probably too long. You know, and the exit was basically a matter of luck, of getting out of the way, because, you know, the business grew to a point where we were selling all over the world. But really it was by the grace of Apple, because Apple would call and be like, guess what? We're going to Japan, and here's a distributor you're going to talk to.
Wow.
And so I was like, all right, great. You know, I'd get on the phone with them, and they would be like, okay, well, we'll put a sticker over the back of your packaging with the required things that need to be written in Japanese, and we need you to give us these compliance documents, and here's the address you're going to ship it to, and, you know, here's how much we're going to pay.
Wow.
And it was based on what Apple was doing.
That's amazing.
They
Apple allowed you guys as an ancillary business to just
they knew that their accessory environment was a big part of their successful launch into countries. And at the time, they hadn't built stores in those countries yet, so they were relying on other partners, retail partners.
Also kind of smart that Apple focused on what they were good at, which was making their individual products. And they weren't trying to buy all of you guys and integrate everything greedily and then mismanaging all of it. They just focused on their product, the art, the beauty, the quality of the technology, and let you guys run the ancillary businesses around it, and then included you in the run. That's a pretty smart approach.
Yeah, I think part of it was, you know, they realized, hey, we have so much capacity, and we can spend that capacity doing something world renowned that no one else can do, or we can kind of launch a Me Too product like a case. Okay, we'll leave all the Me Too stuff to, you know, other players, you know, whether it's like a case or the basic accessory products. They even did that with like their cables. You know, initially it was very hard to get a license to use the Apple connectors. And I think over time they kind of realized, well, wait a second, like, we really make our money selling the iPods and iPhones and iPads and computers and all that stuff. Like, does it really hurt us to just charge a royalty and let somebody make cables? So yeah, it was a crazy business. But I think what was the big shift was two major factors that happened. One, a lot of companies, retailers, realized, oh, we should just build our own brand in China. Or we bring in a branded player here in the U.S. You know, we can take somebody from another department that's successful and say, hey, do you want to license us your name to make cases? And then,
Because you guys didn't have any IP to
Right.
protect you.
right. And it was too
Unfortunately.
hard to have IP because a lot of IP revolved around the device itself. And the device changed every year. So by the time you got a patent on something,
It was already changing.
it was gone. And then enforcing that patent was extremely expensive too. So it was really just a, right timing business.
Speed and then the relationship with Apple. That's wild.
Yeah.
So you said in hindsight, like you think that you should have sold the business earlier than 2017.
Yeah.
When would that have been and why?
I won't get into the specific numbers on it.
Sure.
But I remember, so I had met my now wife. We were engaged in LA and we were traveling somewhere, the two of us. And I remember getting a call from somebody that was like, I'm an investment banker and I could sell your company next week for X amount of dollars. And I was like, yeah, I'll get back to you. And I went on the trip. And, it was like, whoops, I, missed that
What year was that?
payday. That was probably 2007.
Oh, so that was early.
Pretty
So that's
early
10
on.
years before you sold it.
Yeah, because it was like the fury of this new business growing,
Wow.
But yeah, looking back, I don't think I'd change anything. I mean, it's been an incredible ride, and I don't know what else I could optimize,
So what was it that finally made you decide to sell it in 2017 then?
Yeah, I think part of it was just, so we exited to a China factory that was kind of like, we made introductions for retailers to China factories that we had already spent years and years bringing up to a level of production and kind of U.S. standards for production. And so part of it was just there was no margin left. The big box retailers knew, well, we can go buy a case in China for $3 and sell it for $25, and then we keep that margin and we can use it to fund other things in the business.
So your retailers started becoming your competitors.
Basically,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
And I think Amazon played a big role too. Amazon had launched all these products that made it easier to, I think, Fulfilled by Amazon was a big one, because now you could have one guy that was a factory representative in the U.S. and a factory could ship a product directly. And just to kind of put some numbers on it, so let's say hypothetically I'm buying a case from a China factory for $2, and then I put it in packaging and bring it over and I sell it to a retailer for $6, and then they turn around and sell it to a customer. That same factory would say, well, instead of putting $2 into it, we can put $2.25 or $2.50 into it, and we don't have to put our labor component on that. So now they're launching a much more sophisticated product. It's got better paint or better finishes or better tooling, and it's going right to Amazon and they're selling it for $12. And so it became kind of a challenging part of the business. And I think that exists even today in all sorts of products. Is the branded players in the US that are developing these things and selling them are now competing with Amazon on everything.
So essentially, you sold then to the Chinese manufacturer, and the benefit to them was they wanted access and relationships with the retailers. They wanted to bring all the margin in house, and then produce a slightly better, more competitive product.
Yeah.
Did they approach you on that, or did
it
how
was
did that
just a
sale
conversation of hey, what are we doing here, and what does this look like, and kind of figuring it out. And they didn't want the brand or anything; they just wanted to be able to have those relationships.
Interesting. That's wild.
Yeah, and the brands at the time had become kind of irrelevant to some degree.
Sure.
Apple was the brand, and then the second brand below that was Target or Walmart or whoever you were buying it from. It's like, oh, I bought this polka dot case at Target for my iPhone.
They didn't care what name brand was on
what
it,
brand it was irrelevant. Whether it was Kate Spade or us or somebody else, it was kind of a lot less important, I think.
That's wild, man. What a wild run. So looking back on that career journey, building that business, what were your main lessons and takeaways? How would you relate those life lessons maybe to the next generation that's coming up and what they're trying to pursue in their careers or in life?
Yeah, I think I guess the overall mantra is be comfortable saying you don't know something, because there are people that have spent their time and energy learning that something that'll probably teach it to you. And I felt like that happened all over the place. I was getting retail lessons from people that are like rock stars in retail, and engineering lessons from people that, were building the most sophisticated products. And so, yeah, it was really just building that network, and I think people talk about like networking all the time. And I think people usually leave it at, I'm going to walk into a room and meet a guy and then shake his hand and leave. There's never that kind of follow-up that's related to it and how it can help and apply.
Building a relationship and...
Yeah. And ultimately, like, being able to offer help. I feel like I've taken a lot of calls, too, where I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm happy to help you, or I'm happy to explain what little I know about U.S. Customs. Or I can refer you to somebody that really knows it, So I'd say, yeah, obviously asking for help is a big thing. And I think there's another component of it maybe before that, which is getting over the fear of trying something. I forgot who it was. One of my mentors in life taught me that it's like succeeding, failing, not trying. Whereas most people look at it like not trying, succeeding, failing. And failure is the worst. And so I think once I was able to get over that,
and you reorder those in your mind to where it's like, obviously succeeding is ideal, but like failing is part of the process to success.
Yeah.
And then not trying at all is the worst. Like if you do nothing, you're wasting your life. So you at least have to try and fail and and do something.
Yeah. Like generally speaking, if you're going to try something and you ask somebody to help you and they say no, you are exactly where you are now.
You didn't lose anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you ask enough people, someone's going to say yes.
Right.
That's a great philosophy, man. Just asking questions and being young and open-minded to learn and not allowing your ego or insecurities to get in the way is a great way to live. It's a great path to success, obviously.
And I see glimpses of it a lot, and it gives me hope because I think there's a lot of people that I run into in my day-to-day life now that ask for help or ask how I did something or, if I know somebody that can help them. And I think that's a great thing, being able to refer as many people as possible to help in whatever thing that they're trying to do kind of makes the world a better place.
Awesome. So when you sold your company in 2017, did you take time off? Like what did that...
It was really... I had already started something else because I think before any of the actual stuff happened, there was a mental headwind. My wife had told me in probably 2014 that I was burned out. That I had been doing it too long and that that I should move on, And so I had already started working on different things and, was kind of trying to figure out what my next thing was and was starting to look into real estate and learning about that. And so it was kind of a blur that next set of years. I had launched a coffee product, a coffee French press, which was still the greatest failure I've ever had.
Sometimes you learn the most from the failures, right?
Yeah, it was really hard. We launched this company and we did an innovative coffee French press, and we had every obstacle kind of come at us. I really feel like that company was a death by 1,000 cuts. And looking back, I'm sure I could have done a lot better with a lot of things. But yeah, it was one of the more difficult periods of my life.
How long did that last? What was the original concept with it? Just give us the overview of that.
So the company, it was called RightPress, and it was a French press that you could take the bottom off to make it really easy to clean. Mm-hmm. And then we had built an hourglass and a thermometer into it.
Oh, nice.
So you kind of get the perfect cup of coffee every time. And so we had built the product. We did crowdfund. The crowdfund went crazy. I think we had done $1 million in crowdfunding in 30 days or something. It was insane. I put a bunch of my money into it, and we started building. So I went to a China factory and started building there. and it was a disaster. The factory had kind of misrepresented their standards of production, and they couldn't get the thing right, and they were building units that leaked and had all sorts of problems, and and it was an expensive lesson learned going from like a $3 case to a $25 French press. It was much less forgiving.
Sure. And the clients are less forgiving too if they get in and it leaks, doesn't work.
Yeah.
Bad reviews pile up.
Right. And it was a kind of a crowdfund thing, which is also a challenge. So we moved to another factory. Now the price had gone up. We had to pay for tooling again. I fronted a lot of that. And it just was challenge after challenge. We had a patent troll come along and, kind of took us down this avenue of spending a bunch of money on legal, which also delayed our shipping and production processes. And then we had like tariffs coming out of nowhere, on goods that were already paid for. And so, ultimately the hardest thing I think I've ever done is decide to like walk away from that business. It was like a very public failure, which was hard to deal with.
Sure.
But, I think that's just part of life, right?
Sometimes you have to make decisions and cut your losses on some stuff too.
Yeah.
So what was it that made you decide to actually quit on that and walk away from the business versus fighting it out and continue to lose money?
No like specific thing. Again, it was a lot of things going on. It was like, okay, here's what the next projected 6 months of legal is going to cost, and here's what it's going to cost to, get these tools up and running, and here's how much import duties are now versus what they were. Here's what our customer service burden is going to be and our logistics burden, and, understanding all those different things and being like, okay, well, this is a huge challenge. So it was ultimately, and there was no like fine line of like, okay, I'm done today. It wasn't like that clean, I think.
It was more slow, like you said, like death by a thousand cuts, and you're bleeding out. A lot of it's capital intensive. How long did you deal with that? Like, what was the
I don't remember the
duration
exact
of time? Was it?
It was about 3 years.
3 years. That's brutal.
From 17 to I would say 20.
That'll stress you and age you too.
Yeah, it was challenging.
Do you think that the demand for the product was there? That one was just the challenges were in the manufacturing, the quality control, the shipping and imports and tariffs and all that stuff.
The big lesson learned there was my first business was relatively simple. And so I was applying simple philosophies to a much more complicated business. Like you were saying, and it was different things that were relevant, like in this side, because it was a bigger product and involved steel, it was much harder to manufacture than plastic. There was a lot of challenges around, working with a liquid that changed temperatures. So a lot of like engineering things that I think made it challenging. But again, it was where the bright side of that was just in seeing the opportunities that existed. I remember like Amazon calling us and being like, we'd love to have this product, and Starbucks calling, and these huge opportunities on the horizon, which I am still, I think, partly embarrassed and ashamed, and partly like challenged by the fact that I wasn't able to execute that. It was tough.
Failures are tough, man.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, all you can do is take the lessons and move on from them, right?
Yeah.
And make good decisions for life and family. And so for other guys that are good, I mean, everyone has to experience failure, I feel like, in the business world. That's just part of the journey and paying dues at some point. And some of those lessons can be pretty valuable. So it seems like you had some pretty good takeaways. How have those lessons helped you, like, since then? Or what advice or counsel do you have for the younger generation that's experiencing failure for the first time, like even maybe public failure and like?
Yeah, I think now everything's more public, because of the world we live in, right? Everything's on social media and YouTube and all that. So I think it's much harder to go through anything now because there is a spotlight on it. And I would say to some degree, it's like trying to calculate your risk before you jump into something. And have a plan, right? I think a plan is critical, and it doesn't mean it's always going to work. But I think knowing that you did everything you could kind of makes it easier if it doesn't work out.
Sure.
So I think that's a big part of it.
That's good insight. So what are you working on now, man? Like what's the future look like for you?
Well, what I realized in all my kind of soul searching through the businesses and COVID and all that is that the highest probability of success is not how good the entrepreneur is, it's market timing.
Interesting.
It's the only thing that really matters. And it's kind of the whole, rising tide raises all ships. So really spend your time focusing on the tide. And so about a year ago, I stumbled onto, what is AI? And what does that really mean? It's like everyone kind of talks about AI. Like, oh, yeah, I use ChatGPT or, and that's really, I think, the extent of it to most people. And it's so underutilized right now in the world, where people are like, oh, yeah, I used ChatGPT to help me write an email. It's like, okay, that's like saying, I used my iPhone as a calculator. Like, it is capable of so much more, but most people haven't scratched the surface on what that really is. And so I started a company about 6 months ago with a couple of partners, and we're still in stealth mode. We haven't launched the brand or everything yet, but it focuses in the AI space. And what AI is really incredible at is doing repeated actions that are required in a business at a significantly faster speed and a more broad nature than most people can do. And so we are launching these products for customers that are mostly businesses that want to accomplish certain things. So I can give you an example of we work with a company that needs to utilize different aspects of things to make a decision on if they're going to lend to somebody or not. And so that is, they look at things like pictures of houses, credit scores, criminal background history, social media profiles, income verification. And so that's a very arduous process to have people do, but it's something that can easily become a streamlined thing with AI.
Interesting.
Or understanding data matching.
Are you working with Andrew or no?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. So again, it's incredible what these systems are capable of.
That's awesome, man. I know that everyone is aware of AI. I think a lot of people are concerned and somewhat fearful because it's such a major shift.
Yeah.
In everything that we know. And a lot of jobs are going to be replaced. People are going to have to adapt. So I guess on a day-to-day, what segments are you focusing on? It sounds like you're focusing on business services to help businesses analyze and do internal processes faster. What else would be relevant or engaging for us to talk about and get into a little more clarity on that?
I do think there is going to be a fundamental shift in the way business is done in the next 5 years. And I think it's going to require a lot of social as well as business conversations. And I do feel like we are significantly behind on the social aspect of it, and understanding how these systems will affect society and people. I read the statistic the other day that, and I don't remember exactly how much it was. It was 20% of people or something are using ChatGPT as a therapist.
Wow.
And other people are forming a relationship with it. And it makes sense. If you think about, if you're into, say, sports cars and baseball, well, it knows everything about every sports car and every stat about baseball. And so when you text it and say, the Yankees are going to be great this year, it can actually offer you a response based on a lot of data.
It's wild.
And where the real magic is, that is kind of the scary part as well, is it doesn't give you a data-driven answer. It doesn't say, I think you're wrong because the Yankees record is this and the Dodgers record is this, so the Dodgers are going to be better. Because that wouldn't really engage you, and then it wouldn't be maybe as a concerning thing. But it doesn't do that. The responses are much more human. And so it's a really kind of crazy time right now.
So where is it that you see the opportunities then, like in the sector, both short-term and long-term in AI? Or where should people be focusing? How should they learn about AI or implement it into their lives to stay ahead of the curve and to take advantage of this market tide versus being wiped away by it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had a solid answer. I think it depends a lot on the industry that person's in. If you're working in a call center, I think you have some challenges coming because these systems are getting so good at processing information and analyzing what person is saying and responding quickly. And they can do it with a level of technical expertise that a lot of people can't. If you're, let's say you work at a company that does something technical, and if you don't understand exactly what product that, I have this microphone and I get a buzzing sound when I am plugging it into my iPhone, but I don't get it when I plug it into my computer. That would require a lot of expertise, but for an AI system, that's pretty straightforward. And so if you typed that question into a chat, it would give you a solid answer, provided it was trained by a company like ours to give you a specific answer. And
tell you exactly how to troubleshoot it. Interesting.
So we focus on having specific companies. We will help program and tune their AI systems to give specific answers, not pull general information out of.
And make them more efficient.
Right.
So you're custom tailoring AI solutions internal to businesses to make them more efficient and to handle their internal processes.
Yeah.
That's a great niche.
And so, and it kind of applies to every business, which is interesting. Like if, let's say your business, for example, if you ask the question of, I sold Sargam a house in 2021, like what did I sell that for and what interest rate did you get on that loan? You could just type that into an internal system and it would access the data that you have and give you an answer. If you typed that same question into GPT, it wouldn't give you the right answer because it doesn't know exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't know where to look. It would pull some general information. It could be a Sargam that lives in India and a house that was somewhere else. And so dialing in those specifics is really what will make businesses successful, and having that information instantly.
So you're taking the AI technology, integrating it into the business, making sure it has the correct data to then provide them with faster responses and increasing efficiency in the internal business processes. Yeah. That's a great business.
And there's all sorts of acronyms and technical terms to all this stuff, but I think that confuses most people and it almost distracts them from like what really this is. It's like if you had the most knowledgeable assistant when it came to deal terms, and then separately you had the most knowledgeable assistant when it came to construction, this is more like it emulates that more than it does anything else.
That's amazing. So your point that you made earlier is that with regards to like scaling large businesses, sometimes timing's more important and being able to see the tide. Yeah. And look at what the trends are and then like make sure you ride that tide. And that's kind of what you're doing with AI. So as far as the younger generation that's just getting started, man, go back to your 25-year-old self. If you're 25 today with the stuff that's on the horizon and now with all the knowledge that you have from your business track record, what counsel and advice would you give to your 25-year-old self or 21 or 22-year-old self that's just getting started in the current era?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Think about that for a second here. I think first and foremost is you should be learning every day. Absolutely the most important thing. And it's very easy to learn now. You can learn in so many different places, so much easier now than you could ever have in the past. Like a website I still use a lot is Khan Academy. I don't know if you've ever been on it, but it's incredible. It's like it started off with one guy tutoring a cousin or something like that, and now it's like it has a wealth of information that is presented in a very easy way to learn. I used it 2 days ago because my daughter is doing long division and I forgot what. And the other thing that's complicated about it is they teach it differently now than we learned it. And so I hopped on Khan Academy to understand how they teach it now so that I could teach it to her in that way. And I also, will use it for like, what's the difference between a bond and a treasury? And there's a simple explanation. And obviously that's just one website and there's a million places to learn things. But, and like podcasts are another great example, right? There's so many amazing podcasts out there that you can learn about history or technology or whatever it might be.
Now a lot of people listen to podcasts. I mean, I try to squeeze in a lot of the education too. Early morning, like whether you're making food or you're prepping or you're hitting the gym, it's always like, or even drive time in between spots. It's like back to whatever you're studying or listening or growing in knowledge on.
Right.
And it's easy. It's like you said, it's at the tip of your fingertips. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
There's no reason to not be knowledgeable now.
Right.
I feel
curious, I think.
Yeah, I feel like that the challenge the younger generation might have is maybe not as much in the knowledge realm or like growing in information. I think it's more in the action, and probably like we talked about earlier, of the fear of what society thinks of them or like the lack of experience in social engagements. I feel like they're going to have some other obstacles because everything they do is just online on a phone, and for them to go out and create opportunities kind of like you did and take a shot, I feel like they're being trained in the opposite direction of that. And that's going to be a challenge that they're going to have to work on overcoming potentially.
Yeah, it's a great time to be alive. And I think one thing that's really interesting about society and where we are is, say 50 years ago, we used to have a different set of products and lifestyles for people that had a lot of money and people that didn't have a lot of money. But now that's really being compressed. So, for example, you could have a multimillionaire watching the same show on Netflix that somebody that has an hourly job works, because it's a very affordable thing. And it's also great content. It's not like there's a better version out there that costs $500 a month. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's more streaming services or whatever. But we have all this amazing content available to us that I think to some degree makes you pretty comfortable. And comfortability is the opposite of risk. It's pretty hard to say, I have everything I want right now. Let me just go take some risk.
That's true.
Right? And it's funny because I was actually excited to talk to you about this. So I just bought a Tesla like 6-8 months ago, and I bought the Model Y, which is a very affordable car. And it's so much better than the BMWs and Porsches and all those ultra high-end cars that I've had. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, this has really shifted. And it was interesting. I had a conversation with one of the moms that my son is friends with, his son, or their son. And she said to me, and I told her about this car, and it was amazing. She's like, well, I'm not really a car person. And I was like, and that is exactly the point. Is what it used to be a car person was like, you wanted a car that went fast.
It performed well, they handled, braked,
Yeah, and that was really a huge part of it, right? And like, car people bought sports cars. And now it's shifted so much to, it's this way to get from A to B, and what can kind of offer you the best experience in that if you're not actively driving.
Sure.
Right? And I don't know if I would have bought a Tesla. I probably would have, living in LA, because there's all these amazing streets and roads that you can tear through the canyons, and having a car that actually is a driving car is amazing there. But here it's like, I have a lot of rental properties in Ferndale, and I set the auto drive and it drives me to Ferndale. And it's like, this is incredible, And so I do think, again, going back to that comfortability thing, what you used to have to buy a $100,000 card to get Bluetooth and a backup camera. And now
It's standard.
It's standard in so many cars, right? You can buy, like, we rented a Kia the last time I was in LA. And it was like, this is pretty nice. It's like, I would really have to think twice to say, all right, I'm going to spend triple the money for a little bit nicer seats, because it has the same collision avoidance system and Bluetooth and stereo and all that stuff that a lot of these nicer cars have, or incrementally different.
The technology costs.
And so I think one of the
decreases.
challenges that the younger generation faces is comfortability, because we are all talking to each other on our Bluetooth in our car and listening to pretty good music, and it's available on Spotify for 10 or 12 bucks a month, and so it's like what you used to have to do to be, or you used to have to work a certain level to get all these things, you really don't anymore. And so that fire, I think, inside you has to be different. And, I don't know what that is, because it's not something that I had to relate to.
Interesting. It's a valid point. So taking that into consideration, what advice do you have for the younger generation on how to create that fire or drive or desire to do something bigger or greater or different?
I would say, first of all, everyone is seeing opportunity, and being a product guy that's launched a lot of product, the amount of people that come up to me and say, I have an idea, it's like probably happens once a day. Where someone's like, I have an idea and I want to build this thing. And I'm like, you should absolutely do that. There's tools available now, but you have to take that first step, which is the hardest step of saying, I have an idea, to I'm going to do one damn thing about it. And most people won't do that.
That first step.
And so that self-discipline, I think, is absolutely critical. And I think there's ways to enforce that, and I would say starting that enforcement is key. I think you've always been good at that, as far as like, all right, I'm going to eat a healthy breakfast because I'm going to go out to dinner tonight and eat what I want. It's like having that discipline to say, I'm going to do this so that later I can do that, is a great foundation for all those things that'll be coming up.
Discipline's key in success. It's an undervalued trait in the modern society. So how do kids develop discipline young? Let's say their parents don't give them a lot of structure. Like, how do they make a decision to develop discipline at a young age and integrate it into their character or fabric so they can lead a successful life?
Well, I think some of it is the data is there now. Like, we know how important exercise is all your life. Like, they used to be, when you're a certain age, you should start exercising to take care of yourself. But now we're realizing that, like, it's not about your cholesterol or something anymore. It's about, your mental health and all these other things that we know exercise helps you have all your life, right? Same thing with eating. It's like, I do feel a challenge, and I think America probably feels it, is like, it's very difficult to eat healthy here.
Oh, it's horribly difficult.
And you're against the tide on that one.
And it costs more too. That is the one thing that's more expensive, is clean, healthy food in the U.S.
Yeah, it's tough. And it's funny, my wife has always been really good at that, and it just comes naturally to her. Like, I remember, years ago we were at a park or something in LA, and the moms had brought all these snacks for the kids, and my wife brought like oranges, and it was like, oh yeah, I guess that works, but it was like other people that were like, oh yeah, this bar has, egg whites and almonds or whatever, and this other one has this and that, and it was so complicated, but it was like, I think some of it is we've just moved away from those basic things. But those are the absolute keys to success, I think, right? Is like, if you can do those two things well, and that does require discipline, because you're going to drive by an amazing tasting fast food place that costs $2-3 or whatever it is, pretty regularly.
Health and discipline, I like it.
Yeah.
Let's do some rapid fire, like stuff here since we're toward the end of the time that
sure.
we have. So if you could instill one, we just answered this, I'm not sure. If you could instill one lesson into every aspiring entrepreneur, what would it be?
To be curious.
Be curious and to ask questions.
Yeah.
If when faced with a tough decision, what's the first question you ask yourself?
What does success look like in this?
So you look at the outcome first.
Yeah.
It's a very good approach. If you had to sum up your business philosophy in a single sentence, what would it be?
Better to be lucky than good.
That's
Absolutely.
a good motto. What failure taught you your most valuable lesson?
Definitely right. In the coffee press. It was, I don't know exactly what the lesson was because there was so many of them. It was communicate better, plan further out, have more opportunities for contingencies. But yeah, so sorry, nothing specific there. But
yes,
a
lot of lessons.
A lot of lessons.
The thing is, you can learn a lot from failures, which is good because it
Yeah.
leads to more success after that at a higher
One
level.
thing I will say that helped me, though, with that failure and is I sat down and I made a list of everything I thought I did wrong. And it was a long list. And then I went through every single thing and said, all right, well, what could I have done different here, and what would the outcome have been if it was different? And kind of went through that exercise myself as kind of a healing process.
Sure.
And so I think that's a big part of it, is kind of spending some time in that failure and understanding how to be better because of it.
That's a great approach, because then you come away very clear on the mistakes you made, what you would do differently the next time, and the lessons you've learned. I mean, that becomes an education.
Yeah, I think so.
That's awesome. What keeps you going on your toughest days?
That's an interesting question, because I think some of it is you don't have to keep going.
You rested a day or two here and there.
Yeah, exactly. And there's times
reflect, refresh.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. I think being able to take a minute, because I think we do. It's shifting, but I think there is a pride that's associated with working hard, and I don't know if that's necessarily worthwhile. Because I think if you can keep at it, and even if you're going to take a day or a week or a month or whatever and rebuild, it's worth it.
There is value in that. I think that we do rush as a society. We're so used to short attention spans. It's like it's constantly go, 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 go. But sometimes some of the big decisions and taking time to either heal, refresh, reflect, and get better strategy enables you to tackle something and then grow to the next level. Whereas if you're just running all the time, maybe you can't make that next big step.
Well, James, I'd also say that if you look at it, we have a different expectation for ourselves mentally than we do physically. Like if you tore your ACL, I wouldn't tell you to power through. But if you had just come off a business failure and had to go back to work the next day, I feel like we would say, oh, well, you got to power through. In my mind, it is kind of the same thing.
Similar.
An injury requires time and healing and maybe a shift.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense.
Which will make you stronger. So I think that is also part of it, is I think people are like, oh, I'm trying to launch this company, but at the same time I'm worried about feeding my kids and worried about, if my job is secure and this and that, and it's like, maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe now's the time to plan all that stuff and say, when XYZ is in place, I'm going to pull the trigger. But yeah, being able to...
That's a good point of healing mentally from different experiences, similar to what you would physically, and taking that time, and that not being the societal norm, but that being beneficial. That's a really good, insightful point. What is one daily habit you swear by for success?
Oh, man. I'm a definite creature of habit, I think, to some degree. My habits are definitely different than a lot of people, though. But I think creating patterns is a good thing. And I think those patterns should be customized. I think you should build whatever patterns
work for you.
What's
one misconception about entrepreneurship you'd love to debunk?
that it always has to be hard.
I like that.
Yeah. I would say on the average day, I feel like I live a pretty great life. And yeah, there's hard days. And I forgot, there was God, who was that? It was I just saw this podcast, and it's this woman that, she's fantastic. I forgot her name now. But she was kind of like talking about like picking your hard. And sorry, I have like so much media coming at me sometimes. I can't remember who said what. But,
No worries.
But I loved that. I thought that was so cool. You know, it's like, it's hard to be fat and it's hard to eat healthy. So pick which one you want to do. And I think maybe that goes back to that habit thing. But yeah, there's just so much great knowledge out there that I feel like is available to all of us to really help figure this stuff out, you know?
I feel like you can design engineer any type of life you want.
Yeah.
And you have access to all the information to do it. It's about clarifying like your skill sets, your heart and drive and motivation and the vision that you have for your life, and then putting together the pieces, being inspired by people that have already done it and knowing that it's possible.
Yeah.
Internalizing that belief, and then like you said, accessing the information then that will help you get there, and then putting the discipline and building the discipline to do it every day, one step at a time, until you reach whatever that lifestyle looks like.
Yep, absolutely.
This has been fun, man. It's been a great conversation. If you could leave the listeners with one final piece of wisdom from your journey, what would it be?
I feel like we've kind of been over everything, you know?
You covered a lot.
We talked about a lot. But yeah, I would say there's a lot of great ideas out there still. And
there's always opportunities.
There's opportunities to pursue them.
Everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it, bro. It's been a good conversation, man. Very interesting, very fun. I appreciate you taking time and sharing your life's journeys and your failures, and hopefully inspiring like the next generation of entrepreneurs to come and chase their dreams and build the life that they want.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. All right, guys, I'm James Danley. This is the Bulldogs Podcast. Appreciate you stopping in. Any comments, thoughts, feedback, questions for Sargam on AI, the future business that he's working on, or if you want AI integrated solutions into your company, please reach out below, and we'll leave all of his information as well. So thanks. See you guys in the next one.